test. Yeah, it's recording.
Yes, yes, it's recording.
Okay, so the first thing I want to do, just hang on for me one sec. Let me just check something a sec. Okay, the first thing I want to do is I want to thank Arthur, because Arthur recorded the shir yesterday, and he's been playing around with how to compress it so that it's not as heavy from a video point of view, and there's going to be a video and audio option. So Arthur, amazing.
No problem.
It's not easy because there are bandwidth issues. You've done an amazing job with that, and we're going to do a share screen, which we're going to hit in terms of issue. We're not going to share the screen yet because it hasn't come up yet. But just now we're going to, Gavin developed a hierarchical chart. Although we were working on it last night conceptually, I must tell you something, Gavin did all the work on it. And that's secretly why he went to bed at 2:30. Not because he was up watching miniseries. He was actually working very hard for this. So thanks, Gavin. Very, very much.
No. Listen, I've got a sleeping disorder amongst several others, which I won't mention now. But so I sleep at 2 o'clock most mornings, so it's really not a problem.
So thanks.
Okay, that's a small one, Babs.
Okay, so we're gonna get started now. Just give me one sec. All right.
Okay, so it'll be a smaller bag. I'm back.
You're back. All right, let's get started.
Oh God.
Do you want to put it on mute while you do teas and coffees for the family?
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right.
I'll see you. I'll watch the recording if I get a chance.
Unbelievable. All right, guys, you with me? All right, everybody's got family and obligations. All right, so what we're going to do is we're just going to do a bit of a brief summary of what we just. Oh God. Let me just turn off my phones. Sorry, guys. Okay. All right, so what I wanted to do is do a bit of a brief summary regarding yesterday. How this whole conversation came about is that we were talking about cases where the primary damages were not like the subcategory damages. And the reason why that whole argument came into discussion was the Mishnah started, there are 4 primary damages: Hashor, the ox; Habor, the pit; Hamave, the mave, and we're going to see just now what mave actually means. It's a Aramaic term. And Ha'ever, which is the fire. They don't use the term Aish because Aish technically means a flame. A more obviously robust fire is Ha'ever. So that's what it's termed at. Now, when they say 4 primary damages, these are the 4 main damages in the Mishnah. And these are considered generally property damages, meaning that if your property or something you own damages another party, be it a person or their property, you are financially responsible to make restitution. And from the fact that it said there are 4 primary damages, implicit in that statement is the fact that there are secondary damages or subcategory damages. So the Hebrew word for primary is avos, the plural of primary damage, and the an av is a single term in Hebrew for primary. So you've got your toldos again, which are your subcategories, and you've got your primary categories, which are your avos. A toldo is the singular. Okay, so how this all came about is they said, if from the fact that it mentions primary damages, and in that statement it's implicit that there are subcategory damages, we want to know, is there a difference between monetary payment? Michael Kupovitz asked a great question yesterday, between primary damages and subcategory damages. So what the Mishnah is going to do, the very, very first thing it's going to do, is bring about examples in other Gemaras, with Gemara Shabbos, as we discussed yesterday, as well as the rules of Tumah, which is in the Gemara that deals with Kalim, which are temple vessels. And from there, we're going to determine in cases where they are similar in nature, in cases where they are dissimilar, where it's very different, and the reasons for it. And once we have those two extremes, we'll be able to understand a little bit more about what we're dealing with here. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
All right. So just to summarize, whenever they mention different damages, whether it's a primary damager or a subcategory damager, there are similarities and there are differences. So, for example, when the Mishnah continues, before we go back into a quick summary of the subcategories and main category of the rules of Shabbos, it says, the Mishnah starts off by saying the ox is not like the maveh and the maveh is not like the ox. So we're not going to go into the whole Mishnah now. That very statement means that whenever it mentions one category of damage, it's obviously not like another category of damage, especially when you're talking about primary damages. For the simple case of it is, why bring two examples of the same thing? There are inherent differences. And there are certain things that are the same that we're going to find out. For example, when we say that the ox and the maveh are living things, that is in contrast to, for example, a fire, which isn't living. So although it might be animated in the fact that it moves, it's not what the Torah calls living breath. It's not something that actually is of flesh and blood, etc. Then the Mishnah wants to bring one more statement, and all it says is the ox and the maveh and the fire, which ways to go forth in damage, is not like the pit, because what is a pit? A pit is stationary damage. So what they're trying to show here is there's certain things that primary damages, even in amongst themselves, have in common, and certain factors that are very unique to that particular form of damager. And why it would come about is, although we have an obligation and a consciousness to pay, the courts are full of people that don't want to pay. And I can tell you, it doesn't matter how long the payers are and how long the beard is. The minute you're dealing with money, you see a different side of people, a very, very different side of people. And I think I discussed this once with Gavin, that I could turn around and say, listen, pal, why didn't you look where you're going? If you fell into a pit that I dug, that's your negligence. Why must I pay for it? So it's coming to bring certain things where it's trying to prevent the person getting out of paying an injured party. Because what was your pit doing there anyway? If I'm driving down Sandringham Dip and there's a pothole in the road and it's the middle of the night, why can't I go at the speed limit on a public road? You shouldn't have had a damage in the middle of the road. And these are exactly why it's bringing examples, and where it says a pit is stationary, to let you know that anything, for example, that is stationary that causes damage, even though you should have looked where you were going, etc., you can't be expected to be super vigilant to the point that you're continually walking with your eyes averted to the ground. It's not the normal way people walk, especially animals. Animals are not aware. I mean, I think I was walking with Gavin once in Shabbos, and suddenly he slipped in a manhole. You remember, Gavin, you injured yourself a little. So these things happen today. So that's why it's covering all these sorts of damage. So just to give a couple of line summary of what we discussed yesterday, is that Rav Papa wants to bring cases at which the primary category and the subcategories are similar and that are dissimilar. So when it went into Gemara Shabbos, what we said is that there were 39 melachot of building the Mishkan, the tabernacle, meaning that there are 39 activities that were involved, creative activities. And that is juxtapositions in the verse to immediately talk about prohibitions and Shabbos. So that's how we know that the issues of the Mishkan, of building it, etc., are the same prohibitions, but what we're not allowed to do on Shabbos. So in the Torah, it mentions primary categories. What are those primary categories? So, for example, planting is a primary category. Harvesting and reaping is a primary category, because that's mentioned explicitly in Exodus. Okay, it's actually in Exodus 22:5, if anybody's interested. So, the bottom line of it here is that the tordos, the subcategories are similar in nature. Conceptually, they're very, very similar to the primary categories. So, for example, let's say you're watering your garden. Watering garden is actually a subcategory of planting. Why? Because you're enhancing the plant's growth. Just like planting enhances the agricultural plant growth or the flower growth, so does watering a plant. So therefore, conceptually, they are the same. Again, the tordos is not mentioned in building of the Mishkan, planting is, but conceptually they're identical. The same as when you've got reaping or harvesting. If you cut flowers, you're not allowed to cut flowers and put them on the table on Shabbos because it's a subcategory of reaping because you're killing plant growth. Does everybody understand that so far?
Damon, can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah.
Sorry, please adjust your monitor. We can't see your mouth moving. Your head's partially cut off.
Okay, let me have a look.
Because we need to see your mouth moving to, yeah, that's much better. Perfect.
Okay, sorry. I'm sorry about that, guys.
No problem. Now it's perfect. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay.
It's easier if we can see your mouth moving as well. It's easier to understand you. All right.
Yeah, thanks, Gavin. Sorry, I wasn't aware of that.
Pleasure.
Okay. So what happens here is we said that if you on purpose break Shabbat, both a primary category and a subcategory is liable to the death penalty. So it doesn't matter in those days. Obviously, when you had a Sanhedrin, you got the right sort of warning from witnesses, and you ticked all the boxes, and you did it on purpose. In that particular case, whether or not you were planting a field of wheat or you were watering your plants in your home garden, if you did it on purpose, it would be liable to the death penalty. If you did it accidentally, what we said in the state of b'shoigeg, unawareness, and I think Michael or Gavin might have mentioned that a state of unawareness means that sometimes you put your back and you turn off a light or something like that. That is accidental. It would go under that state of unawareness. But what we're talking about, an unawareness of one of two things: either that you didn't know that that particular act was prohibited on Shabbat, or alternatively that you weren't aware it was Shabbat. We gave two examples yesterday. You didn't know that watering a plant was prohibited, or alternatively you go to the loo in the middle of the night, Friday night, and you turn on the light, and then you leave and you turn off the light. At that state of half awareness, because you're still sleepy, you weren't even aware it was Shabbos. You didn't know what day it was. So those are the ways that you can generally transgress unwittingly. In that case, you bring a chatas offering, and a chatas offering is a sin offering. And if you have what you call when they say a simultaneous state of unawareness, say for example you didn't commit one act and you committed two acts of unwittingly breaking Shabbat. It doesn't mean it has to be in the same period of time or the same Shabbat. I'll give you a perfect example. Sometime, I think it was a year after I kept Shabbat, I realized something was prohibited. And I might have made that error a few times. And the minute you become aware of it, you can bring a korban chatas for each time, even if those times didn't happen in a simultaneous time period. Your state of awareness has now jogged your memory, and you're aware of the multiple times you've done it. So it's simultaneous in terms of the fact that a light bulb switched on in your head, and you realize you made a mistake. So that's the one point I wanted to bring. So just like whether you are transgressing the avos or the tordos, the primary or the subcategories, on purpose, you're liable for the death penalty. So too, when you transgress the av and tordos unwittingly, by accident or in a state of unawareness, you bring a korban chatas, a sin offering. What we can see from this here is it doesn't matter if it's an av or tordos. They're similar. They're similar conceptually. And in addition to be similar conceptually, as Michael Kupovitz asked yesterday, is the level of stringency the same? And how does this relate to Bava Kamma? Very simple. We want to ask if the subcategories, well, Rav Papa wanted to know, if the well, he does know, but we wanted to know from Rav Papa, do the subcategories of damages equal in sort of stringency of payment with regards to a comparison with the primary categories? And that's why this whole issue was brought about. Just one interesting point. So this is a case where they're similar in with regards to Shabbos. If you perform a primary category and a subcategory within the same category, you only bring one korban chatas. I'm going to give you two examples. So, for example, if you are planting, and then, which is the avos, and then what you're doing is a week later, you let's call it a month later, when there's a couple of seedlings, you water that plant. And in that particular case, what you're doing is you're fostering the plant's growth. And then about 2 months later, you realize that this particular act is prohibited on Shabbos. You do bring one korban chatas, and that's not because that the Torah does not count. It's because they fall within the same conceptual category. And because they fall within the same conceptual category, they're actually trying to, I think it's a move just to be kind, to save the person a little bit of money. But the actual prohibition, it says in the Gemara, for doing the tordos is actually because you've done the av. You've done the av of planting, even though it's watering and enhancing plant growth. So the tordo is considered exactly the same as the av. And according to Rabbi Eliezer, he said that the only difference between the tordos and the av is semantics, because the one is mentioned in the Mishkan, in other words, historical, and the other one is not historical. So he said even the halacha is the same. He maintains you bring a korban for both the main category and the subcategory within the same category. But all the sources agree that whether it's an avos or a tordos in different categories, you bring a korban for each of them. And this is proving from the Gemara in Shabbos that it is absolutely identical, the subcategories in terms of payment, because you're paying for that korban, compared to the primary categories. There's no dispute. So this is a case where they're similar. And Rav Papa wants to say there are cases that are similar with Avon Tordos and dissimilar, not the same in terms of payment. So now we're going to see a case in one of the other Komoros dealing with tumos, which is impurity, and a case where the Av and the Tordos are different. Now, before we go on, does anybody have any questions with regards to the Av and the Tordos on Shabbos? Please ask now.
I'm good.
No, that's very good explanation. It was perfectly summarized. So great, well done.
Okay, Barry, are you good?
Good, thank you.
Okay, sorry, Barry. I just want to know that everybody's happy, because what's happening is I'm looking at some of the Aramaic here on the screen, and that's why I'm not aware of my face. I can't put up and looking at myself. I mean, I'm no oil painting. Let's not kid. So to look at myself is not exactly as important as looking at the Aramaic, as far as I'm concerned. So what I'm trying to do is give it over in a much easier way than the way it's set up. Not because the way it's set up is wrong in the Gemara. It's just that I'm a little bit deaf, and if you give it over in a way that it's listed here, it's difficult to put two and two together. So that's why I'm doing it this way.
You're doing a
Right.
sterling job, James. Keep it up.
Thanks, man. So what we're going to do now is we're going to deal with tumos. Let me just bring the Aramaic back so I don't get the wording wrong. Okay. So what we're going to see here is that there are there's something called an avos. Let me just explain to you. So there's what you call a head category. So I'll give you an example. If you're having a look at the Mishnah in Bava Kamma, there's 4 categories, right? In the Mishnah, there's the ox, there's the pit, there's the maveh, and there's the fire. These are primary categories in the Mishnah. Then when we hit upon ox, for example, there are primary categories within the ox, and within those primaries, there's subcategories. You can think of it like on a computer. There were main folders, primary folders, and then subfolders within those folders. They obviously never had computers in those days, so they called it a very equal term. So often what you'll have is a primary category in the Mishnah, and then what it will do is deal with each of those categories and go into microanalysis and have primary categories of those and subcategories of those. So it'll all become clear when you see the chart. So in the Mishnah, in Tumos, in the laws of impurity, we say that they're primary sources of Tumah. Now, what I wanted to ask you is, what do you think the highest level, Barry, of Tumah is?
Well, I suppose that would be equivalent to a supreme or a constitutional legality, I suppose.
Okay, so what I'm saying to you is Tumah is impurity. It's ritual impurity. Now, from what you know, what is the highest level that contains impurity?
No, I'm not sure.
Okay, so a dead body.
What?
A dead body. Okay. So what happens is that's called the avos of hatuma, meaning it's the head honcho of impurity. Does that make sense? It's an so, for example, we all know it's an avi avos hatuma, literally the father of avos hatuma. So that is the highest category of impurity. Why? Because just to give you a quick understanding of what impurity is, it doesn't mean the body is dirty or spiritually dirty. What it means is that a human being, particularly a Jewish person that's obviously Shomrei Mitzvos, etc., takes the mundane in the physical world, and through doing brachas and putting on tefillin, he takes the physical and he converts it into spiritual currency. So, in other words, everything mundane, we're not like certain Eastern religions where we go and meditate on mountaintops. We're meant to take our physical attributes and help the poor and build businesses and employ people and do mitzvahs and change the physical world into a way that we can give to others. And what happens is when a person dies, they lose that potential, whether it's a Jewish person or not Jewish person. The only difference between a Jewish person and a non-Jewish person is a Jewish person has added mitzvot and responsibilities in terms of brachas and physical mitzvahs. And but both Jewish and non-Jewish people are capable of acts of kindness and generosity and giving and assisting. So any death takes away that potential, and that's when the soul leaves the physical body. That physical body no longer has that elevated spiritual level, and that comparison is known as tumah, that void. So it's not as though it's become dirty. It's just the potential from what it was to what it's now become is considered tumah. So, for example, one of the other examples is that if a woman goes through a menstrual period of nida, she's considered impure. Not that, for example, in any way she's dirty, but the mere fact that she could have had a child, and that child could have had the potential for life, and that soul that came into that child could have done mitzvot and acts of kindness and avodas Hashem to serve Hashem, and that potential wasn't actualized. It's that state for that certain period of time that renders her impure compared to the potential state of pregnancy that could have resulted, and obviously the benefits therein. Am I making sense to all of you? I actually need feedback.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, you're making
Michael, is it making sense?
Perfect.
Yes, absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely clear.
Okay. No, it's just, the reason I'm mentioning this is not a digression, is that people, especially the media, have made it seem, and especially feminism, that we think of women as dirty and impure, and unfortunately they're missing the point. Women at the highest level, because they're capable of giving life and the potential for creating the next generation of holy people. And it's that loss of potential when it doesn't result in pregnancy that results in the actual tumor. So if anything, it's a praise to women. It's not an insult. But of course the feminists get it wrong. So naturally this is recorded. I'll probably be sued for this one day. Okay. So the head honcho top category of tumors is what's known as a mace, a dead body. Then what you have under there is you have what you call a primary sources. Avot hatumot. In the Mishnah, the primary sources of tumor are the sherets, the semen of the human male, okay, and I want to explain to you, and somebody who touches a corpse. So I want to explain to you what the sherets is. The sherets is 8 categories of animal carcasses that in itself contain inherent tumor, which is impure. So that's a whole different discussion. We're not going to go away from Bava Kamma. Just know the 8 categories of, like a type of lizard and like a marsupial, like a dead rat, etc. These things contain a certain amount of impurity. And the semen of a human male, again, why the semen of the human male? Sherets is more difficult to understand, is because, again, a human male semen has the potential to give life. When that semen is wasted and it doesn't impregnate and result in children, that makes tumor because of the loss of potential. That makes sense. Good.
Yeah.
So, and then the third one is that who touches the human body. So at the top of the hierarchy, you've got a dead human body, a Jew that's passed on, for example. And then your primary categories, these are not subcategories, these are primary. That's the head primary. Under this is the sherets, one of the 8 carcasses that contain tumor, impurity. The semen of a human male is the second one. And the third one is that touches a dead body. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, what happens is that the avos hatuma, Arthur?
Yeah.
Okay, just put your mark off because I'm hearing a whole lot of background. Sorry, mate. Okay. So the avos hatuma have got can infect certain things. So Barry, I know this is a new concept for you. So what they can affect is as follows: is that people, clothing, utensils, food and drink. That's a avos hatuma. It can infect everything. So, for example, somebody that's touched a dead body is known as a rishon latuma, meaning until nightfall, they're in that state, and then at nightfall they have to go to a mikveh. But what happens is if they touch food and drink, utensils, people, clothing, everything becomes infected. And that then becomes Rishon Latuma, meaning it's a first category of Tuma. I'm going to explain this now. Don't worry if you're confused. And then what happens is the first category of Tuma can only convey impurity to food and drink. So I'm going to unpack this. I know it's a bit difficult, but there's no simpler way to do it. So somebody that's touched a dead body will make everything infected. Food and drink, people, and utensils. The person that's touched the dead body can only make food and drink infected. Does that make sense? So you have the dead body, which is the highest level of tumah. Then you have the primary level of tumah, a person that touches the dead body. And whatever he touches infects everything. That's called that's called an avhatuma. Now, the person that touches the person before nightfall and before they've gone to the mikveh, that touches the dead body. So, for example, Gavin and I know Keith Tobacco and Eddie Tates, and they do a wonderful job at the Chev. And sometimes I don't think, and when I see them, I shake their hand. Now, they are an Avatuma because they've been taking care of people at the Chevra Kadesh. Now that I've touched them, I'm known as a Rishon Latuma. So if I've touched them, I can affect food and drink that I'm preparing, and it's got a degree of Tuma. If Eddie prepares the food, and he's worked at the Chev, the utensils, my cutlery, my crockery, my clothing, the people, everything is infected. Does that make sense? So what we see here, and without digressing into a whole lot of detail, is that the intensity lessens. The only thing I want you to derive from there, because I'm not going to go into a whole discussion of Tuma and Tara, is that the intensity is less. To answer Marco's question, the Avasotuma, the dead body, is the maximum amount of stringency. The Avatuma, the person that touches the dead body, is as stringent because they infect everything. That's the Avatuma. The person that touches the dead body is one step removed. The Rishon Latuma, that can only affect food and drink. So what we see is the level of intensity differs, or the stringency is lessened.
Sorry, Jamie. No, there's the Rishon Latuma is the first person that's touched, but the next person that's touched is called?
No. Okay. So listen. Good question. Forget about now the dead body. We also know that is the head honcho category. The primary categories. This is an easier way of thinking about it. Great question, Marco.
No, sorry,
is that?
I just want to, no, what you, sorry, I don't think you answered the question. Maybe I just want you to know the three. There's I know the person at the top, the Abos, but then the person who's touched first is called the Rishon Latuma, okay?
No,
and then the next,
I understood the question. No, so I need to unpack it again. Okay, I did understand the question. It's a good question. So what I want you guys to think about, and this is going to confuse you even in Bava Kamma, is that there's what you call like head honcho. We're going to call them head honcho categories. We're going to call them then primary categories and subcategories. Because the problem is the Gemara's got no way of saying there are different statuses of primary categories. You get what I'm saying? So let me put it like this. Mark, I'm going to unpack it simply. The head honcho category of impurity is a dead body. Right. Let's put that issue aside at the moment. The Mishnah is talking about three categories of avatuma. That is sheretz, which is 8 different carcasses of animals. It's the semen of a human male, and it's somebody that touches a corpse. And all of these three are avatumas. All of these three. And the reason why all of these three are avatumas is because they're capable of infecting everything. People, utensils, food and drink. The person that touches any of these things becomes a Rishon Latuma, which is one level down. And they have no capacity to infect anything other than food and drink.
And utensils.
No. So in other words, in other words, sheretz, semen of a human male, and somebody that's touched a corpse can infect people, utensils, food, and drink. Okay, that's avatumas. That's what. Now, somebody that touches semen. So, for example, whatever they're working in a medical lab. Let's just keep it clean here for the conversation. And they're testing for. They're working in a fertility lab, so they touch semen or whatever, and they take off their gloves, and it touches them. They now become a Rishon. Latuma. So they can only affect food and drink.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
Got it.
Where the confusion lay is that you take into account the corpse, and then the person that touched the corpse was one level lower. And what I'm saying is, as far as the Mishnah is concerned, a person that touches the corpse can infect everything, the same as the semen of a human male, the same as a sheretz. So in other terms, people, utensils, food and drink, infected. Somebody that touches a Rishon Latuma, if I shake somebody's hand that works at the Chev that's been dealing with dead bodies, I become a Rishon Latuma, which is 1 degree less, and I can only affect food and drink, not utensils, not knives and forks, and not other people.
Hundreds. Okay, thanks.
Cool. So, what this is just trying to bring about is one simple fact, is that the level of stringency is less. This is a question you asked yesterday. The level of intensity is less. So the Gemara has brought two completely opposite cases here to prove the point. There are some cases, again, where the Av and the Tordos are similar, like in Gemara Shabbos, and then in Tuma, where the Avos and the Tordos are less intense. They are dissimilar. And why it's juxtaposition these two different contrasts is because it wanted to give us the two different extremes. Because when we go back to Bava Kamma, it's going to say the cases where it's similar, the primary categories compared to the subcategories of damage, and the cases where they're dissimilar. It's not the same level of payment or the same level of obligation. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And Papa said there are cases where they are and they're not. And what Papa's going to unpack in the next couple of dafs is in which cases are they similar and which cases are they dissimilar. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So,
Okay.
Yeah, hundreds. What?
No, ask. I'm so sorry. I didn't hear you asking. Sorry, Michael.
It's not. It's just. I understand exactly what you say, but as you said earlier, it's a kind of way. It's a kind of a flowchart thing in a way, and it's a question at the end of the day of, even though the primary and subcategory, there's primary categories and there's secondary categories of Avs and Tordos, sometimes the elements of, sometimes the elements of each are very similar. Sometimes they're dissimilar in terms of understanding the impact on damages, that's it. I mean, that's the bottom line. But one has to understand the actual, the objects, the actions, the elements involved.
Correct. That's exactly it.
And then the implications if those objects, actions, elements, etc., or part of those categories, part of the subcategories, etc. Okay, so I'm just giving you like a dribble.
No, Michael, you're 100% correct. So that's correct.
So I understand how, one can put it in a flow chart and then color code things that are similar, and then color code damages that are different sort of levels, and then color code those and associate them to those different things. You know what I mean? You could actually draw that kind of stuff up. But that's in a sense why have primary categories and subcategories? It was a way of trying to perhaps differentiate between things that are similar and dissimilar, and the impact
Correct.
on what sort of implications they have.
Correct. So Marcos brought up a good point. The only reason why in many of the cases there's categories and subcategories is the fact that you're trying to create a mind map. And the thing of it is that Gemara is very, very difficult. As easy as I try and unpack it, there are so many complexities and factors, but sometimes you have to get your brain into thinking that this is very, very hard work. I mean, Barry will tell you from martial arts, nobody's going to become seventh Dan unless they've put years and years and years, and you've gone through the sweat, etc. And the thing of it is the impatience that we have as Westerners is that we want our black belt yesterday.
Yeah.
And these things, it's not about getting through it. It's about letting the Gemara change you to the fact that you never think about life in the same way that you did before. That when you're seeing things, you're analyzing everything. And if it doesn't change you, you've wasted your time learning. This has nothing to do with an ox and a sheep and somebody that turns around and said, but it's applicable 2,000. Somebody said to me, why are you learning this nonsense? This is applicable thousands of years ago. I said, listen, pal, the courts are full. Has the human condition changed? Because the human condition states that when you owe me money, you're going to try and self-reason and wangle out of it. And unless we have legal constructs to force you to pay under certain principles, there's going to be anarchy. And that will never change. And what we're doing is we're taking the concepts here. And it doesn't matter if it's a Ferrari or an ox. And we're saying, what about these factors obligates a person to pay, and what mitigates their payment? In other words, there are extenuating factors. And I'll give you one primary extenuating factor, that we have in court. Because, somebody said to me once, Judaism punishes for thought crimes. And they went on a whole they stand on their soapbox. I said to him, I don't understand. Are you meaning to tell me that when there's a homicide case, and say a guy comes home and he sees his wife stripping somebody else, he's not going to go crazy and empty his revolver in the boyfriend's head and maybe in her head because he's gone insane for a second. The court is going to be much more understanding of that. I'm not saying he's not going to do life. Then a guy and a girl that are planning the husband's murder, and he's a poor schnook that's put aside a 5 million rand policy. She's met some oak in his 20s, and he's going to do the husband in so he can live happily ever after. You think that premeditated sort of murder is not going to get a heavier sentence? And again, what's the difference between them? Machshava, thought. The only difference is intent of premeditation. So in many of these cases, the concept behind what the mitigating factors are, what the level of consciousness is, responsibility is, and all these minutiae of detail, they do count. And even if it goes off on a tangent, it goes off on a tangent where you have to be a little bit patient to bring a principle. Because what it does, and I remember saying this to Simcha Steinhauer, I said it drove me mad that the Gemara brings the most, what seemingly is ridiculous example. This is when I first started learning. And he admonished me. He said, don't call it ridiculous. So I said, listen, I apologize. I was a bit out of line. I said, my perception is that it looks ridiculous based on my limited knowledge. He said, that's better. So when I brought that, he said, it's not that. He's got a legal background. He's an attorney by profession. And he said, what happens in every legal case is they stretch it to the point of ridiculous where that law no longer applies. Because you need to see the parameters of the law. You need to see where that no longer is applicable, and there's always a balance in law. So, for example, on intellectual property, it depends what side you're on. So, if you invent something, you've put 5 years, and some guy in China ends up making 1,000 copies of what you've done, and you've put 5 years of work into it, you're going to be a little bit upset because you've lost 5 years worth of your life on this. So there should be intellectual property to protect somebody that invents something. But by the same token, you have medical companies that do R&D, research and development, and while they do need to get back their R&D, the biggest problem that they've got is they hold the poor to ransom, and millions of people die because the medication is unaffordable. So there has to be a case where intellectual property can no longer hold the people to ransom. There's a balance between creativity and protecting those that invent, while at the same time not extorting those that need them. What do you think Microsoft's done for years? They've extorted people. And this is all I'm trying to bring in terms of the point about the law. I don't know if I'm making sense to any of you.
No, 100%. Yeah, no, of course.
Okay. Okay, we're going to end off on this note. The other guys, everything fine, Barry? Off?
Yes, everything's good.
All right. Lovely to see you. I hope the rest of your day is good.
Okay.
And it cheered up my day seeing all of you.
Go ahead.
Okay,
Well
guys.
done, Jared.
Enjoyed it.
Thanks.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Cheers, guys. Bye bye.
Thanks. Cheers, guys.
Scarf,
Thank you.
scarf. Thanks, Damon.
Sure.
Appreciate it.